and welcome back to our Gita and Integrated Yoga course. So today we are going to enter into the esoteric regions of the Bhagavad Gita. So this particular chapter, chapter number 7 onwards and till chapter number 12, which is the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. Our acharyas, they explain that how the 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are further divided into 3 broad categories. The first 6 form one category, 7 to 12 form another category, and 13 to 18 form another category. So if you notice the pattern in our first 6 chapters, the Gita, especially second to the 6 chapters, you will notice that how Lord Krishna is giving some kind of a procedure-oriented process. Right? If you remember in the third chapter, in second chapter, he gave us the Buddhi Yoga, karma on the platform of jnana with the mood intention of bhakti. In the third chapter, Krishna spoke about yajna, performing one's prescribed duties as sacred. Then the fourth chapter, integrate that with now knowledge, the yajna 2.0, again, another action-oriented process. In fifth chapter, we saw how do you combine these two things, again, another action-oriented process. In the sixth chapter, there was an action involved, right, which is more of an internal action. At least in the Ashtanga Yoga, the first 5 limbs are action-oriented, and the next 3 are more internal action, mental action. But still, nevertheless, there is something to be done, right, from like Abhyasa and Vairagya, as we saw. The challenge in the 6th chapter we saw was the obstinate, restless nature of the mind. So to overcome that, Krishna gave the methodology of Abhyasa and Vairagya, practice and dispassion or detachment. So if you see throughout these chapters, Krishna has been giving some kind of an action-oriented process. And therefore, the first 6 chapters are also referred to sometimes as the action part of Gita or karma part of Gita. Again, like I said, terms can have multiple meanings. So do not misunderstand that the first 6 chapters are all karma yoga, or karma yoga chapter we already saw in chapter number 3, right? But just that because all of these have predominantly action as the main theme, so that section is referred to sometimes as a karma section. Then chapters number 7 to 12, we are trying to develop a vision to see Krishna, not just to see Krishna, but to also learn to develop that connection with Krishna by seeing Krishna as the fundamental essence of everything in this creation. So in this section, we are going to learn to literally connect with transcendence. And that connection to transcendence is not an activity of the head or the hands, but it's an activity of the heart, right? So the first 6 chapters, it was the hands which are involved. So we called it as karma section. Now in the next 6 chapters, 7 to 12, we are going to involve our heart. And therefore, we are going to call it as the bhakti section, the middle 6 chapters. Then the last 6 chapters from 13 to 18, Krishna is going to talk about some very interesting philosophical concepts, understanding of this material nature, right? Material nature itself is a very abstract thing. Now to understand that, it's not hands, it's not heart, it's your head which is involved. And therefore, that section is also referred to as a jnana section. So these are like a general broad categories. In all 3 sections, you will see karma, jnana and bhakti's mixture and integration, something that we have been discussing all along. But this is sometimes our acharyas, they like to, classify things to make things easy for us. So basically what we are now entering into, that section we are entering into, is literally the bhakti section of the Bhagavad Gita. So you cannot miss bhakti in these chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Like the first 6 chapters, you could not have missed karma, right? It's so obvious and clear. Krishna is giving, do this, do this, do this, right? You cannot not use your hands in the first 6 chapters. Now, in these 6 chapters, you cannot not use your heart. So therefore, please open your heart as we are entering into this very, very special section of the Bhagavad Gita, right? And with this understanding, let's begin with our today's prayers. So joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Desha Tarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So very quickly, let's set up the whiteboard. Okay, right. And so we begin chapter number 7. And this specific chapter has the name called as Jnana Vijnana Yoga. Chapter number 7 will be called as Jnana Vijnana Yoga. So what does this Jnana Vijnana Yoga here indicate? It indicates, so Jnana means knowledge. Vijnana means realized knowledge. When you have internalized that knowledge, right? That is Vijnana. Realized knowledge, right? So this is the yoga of, right? Yeah. So this is the yoga of knowledge and realized knowledge. So if you want to easily understand this title. Now, if you go back to our second chapter, if you remember, in chapter number 2, we reserved this term Jnana specifically to that body was a soul philosophy, right? Specifically the Sankhya Yoga, the Sankhya philosophy is what we refer to as Jnana. Now, like I said, in many times throughout this course, don't get hung over terminologies because the terminologies change according to the context. So in this specific chapter, in chapter number 7, the Jnana being spoken of is also what is referred to as Bhagavat Aishwarya Jnana. Bhagavat Aishwarya Jnana, where this is not the ordinary knowledge of you are not the body, you are the soul, the 24 elements and the 25th element being the soul. It's not about either the living entity or the prakriti or material nature, but this is knowledge about the Lord. So the knowledge, so Bhagavat, the Supreme Lords, Aishwaryas, his inconceivable potencies, right? So knowledge about the Lord, in short, is what this jnana is talking about. Therefore, understand that this is not the ordinary jnana, but this is special jnana. And one who understands this will be able to connect to the Lord very prominently. In fact, by this, even at the end of this chapter also, your whole perspective to your vision of this world is going to change. That is the speciality of this knowledge. And of course, as you start applying this and you internalize it, it transforms into vijnana, where you will realize it also, right? So that is the main theme of this particular chapter. Now, why this chapter? Why is Krishna talking about this? Again, going back to our Buddhi Yoga definition, right? We discussed how in chapter number 3, Krishna spoke of Karma Yoga. And then on that platform of Jnana Yoga, and once that your mind is also under control. So we saw this in chapter number 3. We saw this in chapter number 4. This integration of karma and jnana, we saw it in chapter number 5, right? And how to control your mind also to create that platform to think, right? Chapter number 6 begins. Now you are going to fill it with bhakti, right? And what does this mean? So if you go back to the last verse of the previous chapter, text number 47 of chapter number 6, Krishna defines who's that best yogi. Yoginam api sarvesham madgater antaratmana. One who's constantly thinking about me is the best yogi. So to think about Krishna, what do you need? To think about Krishna, first you need to know Krishna. How to know Krishna? By first hearing about him. Tat shunu. Therefore, hear. So that is going to be the theme of this chapter. So we are going to, now this I'm trying to, bhakti here means you are trying to somehow remember the Lord or absorb your consciousness in the Lord. You are going to absorb your consciousness in the Lord. So how does this absorption happen? Again, there are broadly 3 ways in which this absorption can happen. At one level, it can happen through some kind of, you can say, philosophical conviction or intellectual philosophical conviction. Intellectual philosophical conviction, or it can happen through some kind of a like some form of focused meditation, like some kind of meditative absorption, or it can also happen through loving devotion. So there are 3 ways in which people can absorb their consciousness in the Lord. One, through intellectual philosophical conviction, or through some kind of a meditative process you absorb in the Lord. You become completely aware of the Lord. Or once you start developing that love, that innate love which the soul has for the Lord, and you start reviving that, then once the devotion comes, through loving devotion also, one can completely absorb in the Lord. So this is going to be the theme. So in chapter number 7, Krishna is going to talk about how through this intellectual philosophical way, how you can completely absorb your awareness of Krishna and just learn to see Krishna in everything, right? And in chapter number 8, Krishna is going to talk more about how at the time of death, there are ways of remembering Krishna, especially the yogic ways of remembering Krishna, and also devotional aspect also comes, but mainly the whole chapter is about the yogic way of remembering Krishna that we'll see in the 8th chapter. Then in the 9th and also in the 10th chapters actually, right, we will see how this loving devotion, meditating, absorbing your consciousness in the Lord through loving devotion, that is going to be the theme. So now even within that inner bubble of bhakti, we are going to see some more fine details, right? So now what does this chapter begin with, right? So let's take a new sheet, right? So this chapter, it begins with a very, very interesting section. So from text number 1 to 12, we are going to know about Krishna and his various energies. Krishna and his energies. So what are this Krishnas and his energies? So he begins by this chapter by saying, "Oh Arjuna, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt." So now hear about it. Tat shrunu. Hear about, because in the 6th chapter I mentioned you are supposed to absorb in me, but that absorption comes by knowing me, by hearing me. So this is a very nice, if you want to, so the first step it begins is hearing about Krishna, like what we are doing right now. Hearing about Krishna is the first thing that happens, and that hearing leads to knowing about Krishna. Right? And when that knowing, the culmination of all knowing is in loving Krishna or in absorption in Krishna. Or when I use the word absorption, absorbing your consciousness in Krishna. Right? Absorbing one's consciousness in Krishna. So this is the progression. So, but the first step is hearing. You cannot bypass that stage, right? And this is exactly how, even if you see modern, even our day-to-day life, how things happen. First, you hear the advertisement about a product. Then you know, oh wow, this phone has so-and-so features, right? Once you know about it, then natural desire comes. Oh, I want to get connected with that phone, right? And then your only meditation becomes, I want that phone, I want that phone, I want that phone, right? That is how effective marketing is described, right? Good marketing means you create such an advertisement campaign that people's consciousness is absorbed in Krishna. And once it is absorbed, then you naturally have to buy that product, like that. So this is how Krishna begins that first verse. And the speciality of this specific chapter, or this knowledge that Krishna is going to talk about, he says, Jnanam te aham sa vijnanam idam vakshyami aseta, which means that I shall now declare unto you this knowledge, both which is of this world and beyond this world, phenomenal and numinous, right? Indicating that this is knowledge of this world and beyond this world. And this being known, nothing further shall remain to be known. So the knowledge we are going to discuss about, what knowledge? This knowledge of Krishna and his energies, right? The knowledge of Krishna and his energies is so special, which means knowledge of this world and beyond is so esoteric, right? That knowing which one need not know anything else. In fact, this knowledge is so special. It is said that Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschidhyati siddhaye. Among thousands of people, one may endeavor for perfection. And among such people who are endeavoring for perfection, among hundreds of them, right? Hardly even one knows me in truth. Krishna is saying hardly, which means not even that one actually will know Krishna properly. So that is the speciality of this knowledge, right? So what is this knowledge? And therefore this knowledge is beyond, and this knowledge is rare. It is such a rare knowledge. So what is that rare knowledge? Let's try to understand. So in text number 4, very important verse for us, Krishna is going to talk about his energies. What are his energies? What is this material world about? So Krishna's energies, right, are twofold. First, we are going to talk about this material world. So what is this material world made of? Krishna says, Bhumiri apaha anhalo vayuru kham manor buddhi evacha ahankara ittiyanme bhinna prakritir ashtada. So Bhumi, earth, apaha, water, Bhumir apaha, anala, fire, Vayuhu, the air, kham, ether, right? So these are the material elements. So it talks about 8 elements here, which is earth, water, fire, air, ether. Then he says, kham, ether, and then mano buddhi evacha ahankara. So then there are 3 more. Then there is these are the 5 physical elements or gross elements. And then there are 3 subtle elements, which are the mind, intelligence, and the ahankara or the false ego. So these are the 8 elements that Krishna talks about, right? And he says, he calls them as Bhinna Prakriti. Bhinna means these are my separated energies. Very interesting term that Krishna is using. He calls them as his separated energies. In a sense that these are not like, very close to me. They're not very personal to me. But then there is another energy, which Krishna talks about in the next verse. He says, in text number 5, he says, Apareyam itastvanyam prakritim vidhime param jiva bhuta mahabhaho yadeyam dharayate jagat. Apart from this 8 elements, there is one more energy of mine. This is called as superior apara energy. That he says, Jiva bhuta mahabhaho yadeyam dharayate jagat. So while these are called separated energies, there is one more energy which has been referred to as a superior energy. And what is that superior energy? He says, Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho, Jivas, which means all the living entities that we see in this world, right? Basically, all living entities, they come in this particular category. Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho. And why? What is it doing? Yayedam dharete jagat. So these living entities, what are they doing? They are trying to exploit the resources of nature. They are trying to exploit this earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, is an ego. Basically, these jivas, the superior energy is trying to control that inferior energy or the separated energy, like that. So this understanding, right, that how Krishna is. So this is matter. This is the spirit. And not just that, there is one more understanding that we need to develop when you're trying to understand Krishna. Is a third aspect. What is that? He says, not only I'm the matter, not only I'm the source of matter, or these are my extended energies or separated energies, not only is the spirit coming from me, but I am also the controller of both. I am also the controller of both matter and spirit. So how does Krishna do this controlling? Very beautifully is going to be described in the next few verses. He says that how all created beings have their source in these 2 natures, and of that which is material and also that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both the origin and dissolution. So in text number 6, Krishna talks about how he is the origin and dissolution. And then in text number 7, very, very famous verse, he says, Mattaha parataram na anyat kinchit asti dhananjaya mai sarvam idam protam sutre mani gana iva. He gives a very beautiful example of a pearl chain. Right? Imagine if you have a pearl chain, right? These are all pearls and they're all strung together and it looks like one cohesive unit. But invisible to the naked eye is that string, is that invisible string which is linking this whole pearl chain to. In fact, if that string is not there, the pearls will fall apart. Sometimes when a string breaks, you'll see all the pearls fall apart, right? So this is how Krishna is giving this very beautiful metaphor to explain, oh, not only I am the origin and dissolution, but I am also the ultimate maintainer. Right? I am holding this entire creation together, right? Like just like that invisible string, like that. So this is so understanding Krishna as the so understanding Krishna means the complete knowledge of Krishna means understanding matter, understanding spirit, and also understanding that how he's a controller of both. Right? So if you disconnect matter and spirit from Krishna and only try to understand, oh, how Krishna is the source, how is the origin, how is the dissolution, then that is not the complete understanding. Right? So if I may paraphrase this origin, dissolution, and maintenance in a different terminology, right? So what we are trying to understand here is that understanding Krishna as a generator, operator, and destroyer, right? So just if you just understand this one aspect, right, that is the popular understanding of God. So what is God doing? Okay, he creates this world. He's probably busy maintaining this world right now. And when the right time comes, he also destroys it, right? This is the typical understanding of the concept of God across world traditions. But Prabhupada very beautifully explains that the conception of God and the conception of the absolute truth are not one and the same. Because understanding Krishna means even going beyond the understanding of God. God just means this aspect, origin, dissolution, maintainer. But along with that, if you also understand what is matter, what is spirit, how these two are also connected to Krishna. Ultimately, if you say in one sense, everything in this creation is connected to Krishna or it is dependent on Krishna, yet Krishna is independent of everything. That is the conception of the absolute truth, right? And that is where Prabhupada very beautifully, he gives the name of this chapter as knowledge of the absolute truth. It's not knowledge about Krishna. It is not knowledge about God, right? When I say knowledge about God, just God is God doing, he's creating this world, maintaining this world and destroying this world. That is not what Krishna does. Krishna, the concept of Krishna is much, or the conception of Krishna or the accurate understanding of Krishna is way beyond even the conception of God. And this understanding of the absolute truth, right? So all of this, Krishna's energies, when you understand that, then we understand the absolute truth. What do I mean by the absolute truth? Absolute truth is that which is beyond the relativities, because most truth, most facts that we know in this world are limited by time, place, and circumstance. But when it comes to the absolute truth, they are independent of time, place, and circumstance. Like a simple example, if, like right now, the time is 7:30 p.m. If somebody says, no, the time is right now 8 p.m. I says, no, how is that possible? But that 8 p.m. answer is applicable in, say, Bangladesh, which is 30 minutes ahead of India, right? So the answer 7:30 is applicable or is restricted to a relative geography called as India. So it is not the absolute answer, but it is a relative answer. And in different parts of the world, you'll get different answers. So most truths that we deal with in our day-to-day life are all relative truths. But when you go past these relativities, when you rise beyond these limited relativities, then you understand the concept of absolute truth, who's beyond. And that absolute truth is who the Bhagavad Gita talks about as Krishna. So you see, so even to understand Krishna in full, we have to sometimes challenge our own limited understanding of what God is. Krishna understanding or Krishna consciousness is even beyond the so-called God consciousness or God understanding, because we are trying to include everything that is there. And just to give that example, Krishna is now going to quote some interesting scenarios, some two different or four different scenarios, and we'll try to analyze those scenarios. So in text number 8, Krishna says, Rasoham apsu kaunteya prabhati shishushureyo. O Arjuna, I am the taste of water, the light of sun and moon, the sacred syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, and I am the sound in ether and ability in man. Now, if you look at if you analyze the pattern in all these statements that Krishna is making, right? What is he talking about? Water, sun and moon, right? So based on the previous transcendentalists that we have studied in the Bhagavad Gita, think about it. Which category of transcendentalist, which yoga process you think, right, involves sun and moon, chanting of Vedic mantras, understanding, connecting to the Lord through that Omkara, through that ether, Om, and of course through the that Om heard through that sound in ether. and one's own personal ability, right? And how such a person is isolated from this world and probably just sips some water for his survival. So we're talking about such kind of an Ashtanga yogi. So in text number 8, Krishna is basically talking about all the things an Ashtanga yogi who's already renounced, the second level yogis, Aruruksha and Arudha, the advanced yogis who have already ceased to work, and when they go into a recluse mode, when they go into a forest, go to the Himalayas, somewhere like that, right? And then when all they're interacting with the sun and moon, hurt her in, this Surya Namaskara, Chandra Namaskara, or they are just dealing with little water, but they are chanting the Vedic mantras. In fact, in the Yoga Sutras also, Om is a very important representation of the Lord, right? He says that that Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, can be understood through Om, and that Om, and of course the Lord in general can be understood by tad japaha artha bhavananam. By japa. Japa means like repeated chanting of Krishna's names with bhavana, with feelingly. If you repeatedly chant Krishna's names or the absolute truth's names, that is how you'll be able to realize the absolute truth. So that is, so the principle of Om and the chanting of Omkara, and in general the names of Krishna, that has been highlighted. So all these things we saw in text number 8 are something that an Ashtanga yogi interacts with. Now think about text number 9. Who is that person? I am the original fragrance of the earth. I am the heat in fire. I am the life of all that lives. I am the penance of all ascetics. So this is very straightforward. Here he's talking about the ascetics or the tapasvis. Tapasvi means one who is doing tapasya, or one who is living that kind of an ascetic life. So the difference between an Ashtanga yogi and an ascetic is, while an Ashtanga yogi is completely isolated, an ascetic still has some daily activity, in the sense, for example, they do their daily yajna, whatever little they need for their survival, even the forest, when they're living, to cook some food, they have to take some wood, right? And so like that. So they are the ones who see there's the heat in fire. They see when they are especially they live in the forest, they don't go too austere like Himalayas straight away. They're still living in the forest, so there is vegetation around them. They are seeing all the different forms of life around them, like that. So and within that setting, they are doing their penances or austerities. So that is the tapasvi vision. Then in text number 10 and also 11 for that matter, right? In 10 and 11, we are seeing another category of transcendentalists. Know that I am the origin seed of all existence. I am the intelligent of the intelligent and the power of the prowess. So who's dealing with power, intelligence, what else? I am the strength of the strong, right? And devoid of passion and desire. I am sex life which is not contrary to religious principles, O Lord of the Bharatas, O Arjuna. So what kind of a person are we dealing with? One who's interacting with intelligence, strength, power, who's still involved actively in the worldliness, in the sense of they are still involved in the procreation activities and expanding the population of this world. So we are talking about those who are still involved with work, the karma yogis, right? So here ascetic, we can, because a jnana yogi may initially begin with an ascetic and may eventually mature or culminate into Ashtanga yogi, or sometimes as an ascetic itself also they will remain there. So I will include the jnana yoga also in this category. Right? So it's not exactly like a hard and fast classification, but just to give you an appreciation that Krishna is saying that irrespective of which path of yoga that you may choose, the key things that you are interacting with are all finally me. So Krishna is saying that directly or indirectly, ultimately each and every one of us, we are interacting with Krishna, period. That's it. Right? This is a very, very important understanding. Right? Whether we know it or not, actually we are always interacting with Krishna. So the principle here is that nothing is independent of Krishna. Nothing is independent of. So when Krishna says that, I am the fragrance of earth, I am the intelligence, So one should not take it like, I as in not just literally the personal Krishna, but it's saying that it is dependent on Krishna. So nothing in that way is independent of Krishna, and yet Krishna is independent of everything. Right? This is the specialty of Krishna, like that. So in these 4 verses, so think about it. So this is also a concept which we'll elaborate in great detail in the 10th chapter. But even at this point, we understand that actually anything that is facilitating my spiritual growth has to have some connection to Krishna. Otherwise, it cannot facilitate my spiritual growth, right? It is only spirit that can enhance my spiritual quotient. And that spirit is coming from the Lord himself. So like that, one has to learn to see that connection of Krishna. And this is a very beautiful concept, because many times when you are in this world, and we are still not so pure that you can directly interact with the personal Krishna, or, straight away you can visualize the Lord, or even when you're looking at the deities, sometimes, we may not develop that kind of a strong spiritual vision to see Krishna there. But definitely one can see how this world is operating, what are the things that I'm interacting with this world. And that way, when I understand this section of the Bhagavad Gita, you will appreciate, every time I'm drinking water, rasoham apsu kaunteya, this water is giving me satisfaction because it is connected to Krishna. There is an element of Krishna-ness in it, right? When you are sitting near fire and feeling its warmth, you will say, there is an element of Krishna-ness in this fire, and therefore it is satisfying me. Otherwise, if something is not connected to Krishna, it can never give you any satisfaction of the soul, like that. So this is a very, very important principle, right? So then, after having described this, then an obvious question comes, really? Is Krishna everywhere, right? If indeed Krishna is everywhere, then why is it that I'm not able to see Krishna? So that is going to be the theme of our next section, where from text number 13 to 20, we are going to understand how to see Krishna. How to see Krishna. Right? So to first understand how to see Krishna, first thing we need to understand that why we are not able to see Krishna. If Krishna is present in everything, he is present in the sun, he is present in the moon, he is present in water, he is present in earth, he is present in fire, he is present in all forms of life. Why am I not able to see Krishna? Right? Very powerful example. Tribhir gunamayir bhaver ebhi sarvam idam jagat mohitum na bhijanati mam ebhya param avyayam. So reason we cannot see Krishna, we can't see Krishna because of this Tribhir Gunamayir Bhaver. So these 3 modes, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, the 3 modes of material nature, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So these are the 3 elements of material nature which are actually covering my consciousness. Right? Because right now the soul is operating this material world. It needs a channel to express its consciousness. And the channel are these 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. We'll elaborate more on this concept in the 14th chapter. Right? So at this point, think of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas as the fundamental building blocks of material energy. And it is these fundamental energies which are blocking my consciousness from seeing Krishna-ness in everything. Right? Moment you are seeing Krishna-ness in something, it is as good as seeing Krishna and experiencing Krishna. But we are not able to do that because the 3 modes are covering me. Right? So then, so how can I learn to get over these 3 modes? Again, very, very powerful words. Text number 14. He says, Daivi hi eshi gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mameva hi prapadyante maya metam tarantite. So this 3 gunas, right? Krishna says, it is my Daivi, it's my divine energy. Material world or Maya is also Krishna's energy. Because it is Krishna's energy, it is so difficult for us to overcome. Right? Therefore, but Maam hi prapadyante maya metam tarantite. So the way to see Krishna, is to the process of surrender. Right? So one who surrenders unto me can learn to see it and cross beyond this material existence. Right? So then naturally the question comes, oh wow, is it so easy? Surrender. Then the question comes, who are the people who surrender and who are the people who do not surrender? Those who do not surrender and those who do surrender. That is a theme that Krishna is going to talk about. Right? So this purport that we're going to read next, text number 15, is one of the longest purports you will see of the Bhagavad Gita, and definitely the biggest purport of this chapter. So Krishna talks about 4 categories of people who do not surrender to Krishna. Who are they? They are called as Namam Dushkritino Mudha. Right? So there are Mudhas. Mudha means grossly foolish. Grossly foolish, which means that they don't even know what the purpose of life is. They're just working like an ass all day long. Right? Not knowing what the real purpose or real priorities of life are. Then there are who are called as Dushkrita Mudha, Prapadyante Naradhama. Naradhamas, Prabhupada translates them as those who are lowest among mankind. Lowest among mankind. So what are these? These people may seem socially, politically, financially, they're all doing good, but they have no spiritual awareness, they have no devotional, or even religious awareness for that matter. They are the Naradhamas. Then Maya Aprita Jnana. Maya Aprahita Jnana. Right? So these are people whose intelligence has been stolen away. Intelligence stolen by Maya. So what do we mean by intelligence stolen by Maya? So these are all the expert scholars, intellectuals, academicians who are trying to understand this creation, understand this world, disconnecting God out of the picture. So this is the effect of Maya on their intelligence. They are not able to see Krishna. They have great scientific theories to explain the creation, how the creation, maintenance, and destruction of this world is happening, independent of Krishna or without Krishna. Because that is what Maya does, right? It veils. It doesn't allow them to see Krishna, right? Or rather, they themselves choose not to see Krishna, right? So that is the problem of such people. Then finally, the last category is Asurim Bhava Ashrita, or the Asuras. Asurim Bhava Ashrita, or basically these are the demoniac people. They are outright atheists, right? They are outright, they condemn people. In fact, they get upset when you talk about God to such people, right? So these are the 4 categories of people who do not surrender. Then naturally, then there should be opposite explanation of who do surrender. So who surrenders, right? So very nicely again, Krishna talks about 4 categories again. The 4 categories of people who do surrender. One, he says Artho. Artho means one who's distressed. Artharthi. Artharthi is one who's looking for some kind of material profit, wealth or profit. Right? Then Artho Arthasi Jigyasu. Of course, the order in the verse will be Chaturvidha Bhajante Mam Janana Sukrito Arjuna, Artho Jigyasur Artharthi Jnanicha Bharatashobha. But in the progression, the Jigyasu comes little higher. Jigyasu is one who's curious, inquisitive. Just like some kind of a seeker who's just curious about God. And finally, the fourth category is called as a Jnani. Jnani means like a one who's already in knowledge, knowledgeable person, right? So such a person, Artho, Arthati, Jigyasu, and Jnani. So these are four categories of people who actually surrender to Krishna. It's very interesting about these four categories, because when we go through material distress, a pious person, a slightly sattvic person, naturally develops an inclination to pray to God and worship to God. Even when we want something in life, when we are not getting, we are struggling hard to gain something, there's a natural tendency to go and pray to God. And even when you are inquisitive, when that burning fire of inquisition is there within your heart, right, then also we approach God. And finally, there is a knowledgeable person who understands, after having read the scriptures, they understand the purpose of life is to connect with God. So those are the four categories of people who approach. Now, among these four, the first three are not so pure, in a sense that once your distress is gone, you also forget God. Once you get your wealth, once you gain your wealth, then again you forget about God. And once your burning desire, whatever your question, your inquisitiveness or your inquisition is satiated, then again you forget God. There's a chance of that happening. But a Jnani is, on the other hand, is already convinced, very fixed up about his intent to surrender to the Lord. Right? So they're all having intent at this stage. They're not fully surrendered, but they are intent. So they just come to the process, right? And that, therefore, Krishna acknowledging that, he says, actually, among all these, all of them are great, but for me, according to me, this Jnani is special. In fact, Krishna goes on to say that such a Jnani is so rare. Bahunam janvanam ante jnanavan ma prapadyante vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma. So Krishna Chaitanya. So Durlabha, excuse me. So right. So Vasudeva Sarvamiti. So such a Jnani, after many, many lifetimes, many, many births, he comes to the understanding that ultimately everything in this creation, the same thing what we wrote earlier, nothing is independent of Krishna. Vasudeva Sarvamiti. So Vasudeva is another name of Krishna, representing that how he is that all-pervasive, supreme, absolute truth. Right? That omnipresence of God, if you want to put it in one word, God the omnipresent, right? Then the name which is used is Vasudeva. That is why even before our classes, we begin with Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudeva. We are trying to offer those personal prayers to the Lord who's present everywhere, like that. And this is not some kind of an impersonal presence everywhere. He's personally present everywhere. And that personally present form of Lord who's everywhere is that understanding of Vasudeva, like that. So because such a person is already surrendered, Jnani, therefore they are extremely rare. So that is an important principle that we say, because such a person, their conviction to approach Krishna is not out of some distress, profit, or just some curiosity, but their conviction is based on knowledge, proper understanding. So we all should also aspire to come at least to a level of that kind of a knowledgeable Jnani, right? And not let these other things be our motivation to approach Krishna. Of course, Krishna is not condemning them. He says all of them are magnanimous. All these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, Krishna says in text number 18. However, Krishna says, but this Jnani is, as good as me, is non-different from me, in a sense that, he's so dear to Krishna, like that. So what we understood so far in this chapter is how Krishna, so matter, spirit, and controller of both. Understanding this means understanding Krishna, right? And once you understand that, you will see that ultimately Krishna is the active principle, everything. Nothing is independent of Krishna. But if indeed he is present in everything, why are we not able to see Krishna? Because of three modes. So how do I overcome these three modes? Through surrender to the Lord. So who surrenders? Who does not surrender, right? This has been the flow of thought till this point. So now we're going to discuss, as has been our convention throughout this course, even in this Jnana Vijnana Yoga also, there is an obstacle that may come. So the challenge in this process, right? So there are two challenges that will come. So first challenge, so if you see, what are we trying to connect to here? We're trying to connect to Krishna, who's so great, who's greater than me, at least to begin with, right? So a misunderstanding may come that anybody greater than me has to be God, right? But that also understanding is also not right, because there are many entities who are greater than us, and in the Vedic parlance, they are referred to as the devatas, right? Prabhupada uses the word demigods, right? So these devatas, if you remember, we mentioned this in the 4th chapter and 3rd chapter as well. They are mere cosmic administrators. They are not the supreme in themselves, right? They are like ministers in a government position, but there is a prime minister or the president who's at the top. So the first misunderstanding that one may get is that anybody greater than me has to be God. Therefore, one will start mistaking that all these devatas are also God. So we get some kind of a polytheistic understanding of the truth. So if you may write it down. Some kind of a polytheistic understanding that, there are many gods. In fact, unfortunately, those who do not understand the Sanatan Dharma, the teachings of the Vedic culture, they also many times understand, Hinduism, the modern word Hinduism, is polytheistic religion. But no, if you see throughout the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam, the Upanishads, the Vedic literatures, they all talk about a monotheistic understanding, to simplify at a very basic level. But there is more elaboration to it, something that will, it is something even beyond monotheism also, a concept which we'll understand in our future sessions. But definitely it is not polytheistic, right? So regarding that, Krishna explains that actually when these people, what they do is, because they want that success in their endeavors, they immediately approach those devatas and they want to get some quick results. There's a concept which Krishna spoke in the 4th chapter also, in text number 11. He talks about this, how men desiring quick results, they approach the devatas, right? But then here Krishna is saying, but actually even when they approach a devata, you know what happens? I am present as super soul, as Paramatma within everyone's heart. I listen to their desires and I indirectly fulfill them through those devatas. Because ultimately Krishna is the one who's fulfilling. Even when you approach a devata, Krishna is the one who is fulfilling one's desires, like that. So therefore, he says, so endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular devata and obtain the desires. But actually these benefits are bestowed by me only. And in text number 23, he says, Antamantu phalam tesham tad bhavati alpamedhasa. So those people who consider that these devatas, anybody greater than me is God, they are all Krishnas, right? To that kind of, or they are all gods, to come to that kind of understanding, Krishna uses the word called as alpamedhasa. Alpamedhasa, alpa means little, medhas means intelligence. So he calls them as people of less intelligence, which is a very polite way of calling them as fools, right? They're less intelligent, right? So understand, Krishna is not condemning the process of worshipping devatas. If you remember, we discussed this in 3rd chapter as well. Krishna is not condemning the culture of offering pujas or offering yajnas to the devatas. Krishna is condemning the misunderstanding, the philosophical misunderstanding that may come, right? So both of these challenges are actually philosophical challenges, or if I may say, let's write this down as well. So these challenges are actually philosophical misunderstandings. So what is a philosophical misunderstanding? Thinking that anything superior to me is also worshipable, and or they are indeed worshipable, but they are the highest truth. So that understanding is alpamedhasa understanding, right? So Krishna is not condemning the devatas, but rather the misunderstanding that they are the highest truth, they are the absolute truth. that one absolute truth is all this collection of devatas. That's what polytheism means, right? That's understanding is a less intelligent process, right? So then there's another misunderstanding. So this is another extreme of the spectrum. One extreme is anything greater than me is God. Other extreme is, oh, God is so great. God is so great. He cannot have any form. He cannot have any limitations, because form creates limitations. Therefore, he has to be formless. Otherwise, how can somebody have a form and be Vasudeva Sarvamiti? He can be everywhere, right? If somebody has a form, means they become limited. But that is, therefore, but God has to be everywhere. Therefore, Krishna is impersonal. So this kind of an impersonal understanding, avyaktam vyaktim apannam manyame mam abuddhaya. So this next understanding is the impersonal understanding, right? So what is the term Krishna uses here? He calls him as, while previously he called him alpamedasa, here he calls him as abuddhaya. Abuddhaya means here that they have no intelligence. So in a sense, at least previously he said they have less intelligence. Now he's saying these people have no intelligence at all. This whole impersonal understanding that, God has no form, form is a limitation. So all these philosophical misunderstandings is a philosophy of no intelligence or zero intelligence, like that. Because he says they think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was impersonal before, and now I have taken a particular form, and this form is also a form of Maya. So technically, this particular philosophy is also called as Maya Vada. What does this Maya Vada mean? So Maya Vada means an argument or a philosophical position. So this Maya Vada philosophy says that ultimately this whole world is an illusion. Not only this whole world illusion, but even the form of God is also illusion. The Lord has no form. Ultimately, is just some impersonal light, right? So to deny the form of Lord is what is referred to as this Mayavada philosophy, right? Which is actually a philosophy of no intelligence. In fact, it's a very offensive philosophy. And therefore, Krishna says, Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavrita mudoyam na abhijanati lokamam ajam avyayam. I do not manifest to such foolish and unintelligent people. The previous two categories, for them, I am covered by my internal potency. So for such people, for those who are genuinely trying to approach Krishna, Artho, Arthati, Jigyasu, Jnani, even if you are trying to approach Krishna out of some material motive, Krishna somehow reveals himself to you at some level or the other. But if you are an impersonalist, or if you have misunderstood the relative position of the Devatas and Krishna and start equating Devatas with Krishna, to such people, Krishna says, I will never reveal myself to them, right? And that is why, in fact, if you see, if I may generalize, of course, generalization is never good of any kind, but in general, if I may say predominantly, if you see, in much of the Indian society today, we see the first kind of philosophical misunderstanding where one may say that, all these devatas, all these different cosmic controllers, they are all gods. One may come to that kind of a misunderstanding. The other misunderstanding you will see, especially in the more non-Indian setups, you will see many modern, setups, you will see that they have a very impersonal understanding of God. God cannot have form. He has to be formless. That is how he can be everywhere and create, maintain, and destroy, right? So they are trying to extend their worldly logic towards the Lord. Lord can have a form and still be everywhere. That is where, and this is something I'm not talking, out of an abstract way. When we discuss the 9th chapter, we will very clearly, logically, philosophically try to understand. In fact, all of you will be convinced that how God can be, or how Krishna can be omnipresent, is something that we'll understand very clearly when we read the 9th chapter. So these are the philosophical misunderstandings of polytheism or impersonalism, right? So this we have to overcome. So how do I overcome this, right? So that challenge, how do I overcome this challenge, right? Krishna talks about it in the next section. So the obstacles we spoke here. So Now, in the next section, from text number 26 through 31, in the next section, Krishna is going to talk about the solution. And what is the solution for this chapter? Which is learning to see Krishna in full, or understanding Krishna in full. Understanding and seeing Krishna in full. Let me explain what seeing Krishna in full actually it does not mean that you only see half the picture right now. Now you see the full picture, the full form of Krishna. That's not the understanding, right? So right now, how am I seeing this world? Right now, my vision of this world is very much defined by my ego, my false identity creates a sense of attraction and aversion, right? Material interaction means using the filter of attraction or aversion. I like this, I do not like this. I like this person, I do not like this person. And what is the basis of all of that? Our own ego. Because when I say I like something, what we indirectly mean is this thing is gratifying my ego. You know, like for example, if somebody likes your idea, somebody supports your idea, right? Then you will say, oh, this person I like. Why? Because he's supporting my idea. At that stage, your ego becomes, I'm the generator, the origin of this idea. So therefore, anybody supporting that idea is indirectly supporting me. So you take it very personal. Likewise, when somebody rejects your idea, you know, for whatever reasons, logical reasons also that they may have, we see it as a very personal rejection. Hey, by rejecting my idea, this person has rejected me because that is my idea. So that is how the ahankara works. The ego tricks us. So literally all conflict in this world, if you see, is happening because of this ego, because of our false identification with certain notions, and those false notions create false attractions and false aversions, right? This is very beautifully described in text number 27. Ichha dvesha samutvena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani samoham sarge yanti parantapa. So all living beings are born into this delusion, bewildered by dualities arising from desire and hate. So attraction here is the desire and aversion is that hate, right? So because our entire worldly life, you know, because this is a very, very powerful point, how our ego creates that false identity. And literally, if you see, all our likes and dislikes in our life have a link to a certain false identity that we are carrying. Like for example, let us say, you know, there is an India versus England cricket match, right? So if India wins the match, if you are wearing the false ego of I am an Indian, then you will be attracted to that match. But if you are wearing the false ego of I am an English person, then because England lost the match, you will start hating it. But suddenly, if say, for example, some Chinese person who's wearing his Chinese hat, that is also a hat, but still it is neither an Indian hat or an English hat. Therefore, in that situation, a Chinese person like, what cricket? I don't even know what cricket is. I don't care whether India wins or England wins. In fact, I don't even know what that whole cricket game is about. So you see, because that person doesn't have an egoistic identification with that sport or those respective nations which are involved, that person is free from attraction and aversion. That person is a very, very peaceful, neutral state. Whereas when our team loses, we become depressed, or when our team wins, we become falsely elated. Why? It is all the gratification of the ego. So therefore, in all life situations, there's a very, very powerful principle we can apply. Every time you are feeling strongly attracted to something, you know, when you're experiencing some strong pleasure, or when you're experiencing some strong pain or hatred or aversion, step back from the situation temporarily, momentarily, and ask yourself, which identity of mine is causing that emotional response of attraction or aversion, of like and dislike? Which identity about me is being gratified in that situation? If you can identify that, then you will see you'll be such a peaceful person. You will not unnecessarily get carried away by false attractions and false aversions of life. You will maintain that sense of equanimity and steadiness, right? So such a person, to attain that equanimity, even these attractions and aversions, how do they form, right? Because our previous experience of pleasure defines our present attractions, and our previous experiences of pain define our present aversions, right? So this is a very, very strong principle. Understand, you and I, myself also included, we all actually, we very carelessly interact with pleasure and pain of this world, not knowing what kind of a scar they are leaving in our subconscious mind, in our samskaras, right? Every time you experience some worldly pleasure, you may think it is an innocent act. Okay, yeah, I just had a momentary pleasure, whatever you may have. But we are forgetting that it is creating it's like glue. Pleasure, the experience of pleasure is the glue that creates attraction in our head. And the experience of pain is also a glue that creates aversion. So from a material perspective, pain and pleasure, there is no difference, because both of them are creating an impression in our consciousness. They are all creating material impressions. And these material impressions are what that create an experience of past sin, piety or sin. From a Gita perspective, both are the same. So from that perspective, both are actually sins, right? So these material impressions are nothing but our past karmic sins, right? Understand, sin is not some kind of something existing in the universe, right? They're all right there in our head. What you have done in their last life, whatever illicit activity, whatever forbidden activity, whatever sinful activity you have done, it is right there in your head in the form of your inclinations and your impressions, right? Your impressions create your inclinations, and as inclinations then further create certain instincts within you. And that is how we get trapped. Our past karmic sins, they create a trap, and we get trapped in that whole cycle of actions and reactions, and that's how we get lost in it. So therefore, a person needs to work on purifying one's existence, right? Purify one's existence. What do you mean by purify one's existence? Purifying these past impressions through spiritual practices. Only spiritual practices can purify, right? And to aid those spiritual practices, to support those spiritual practices, we need some kind of a sattvic lifestyle, sattvic setting, etc. Such a person, esham tu antagatam papam. So those persons who acted piously in their previous life and whose sinful reactions are completely eradicated, such people are free from this delusion, like that. So when one is free from this karmic reactions, right, or basically one is worked on this past impressions, such a person, when they come in contact with the pure devotee of the Lord, they immediately take to spirituality, they immediately take to devotional service, right? So if you remember, again, a little clarification. Yesterday, if you remember, in one of the Q&As, I mentioned that how bhakti is beyond karma. It is independent of karma, right? In the sense that even if your past sinful reactions are removed, until that touch of bhakti comes from another bhakta, one cannot begin one's devotional process. Of course, Krishna is giving a very generic presentation here, so he's not talking exclusively about bhakti. Even for one to begin one's spirituality in the form of karma yoga or jnana yoga or ashtanga yoga, that burden of past sin is something that one has to overcome. And how does that past sin affect us? in the form of our own mental, emotional, psychological states. Sometimes you may feel, like causelessly depressed. Understand, it is just some past impression which is just resurfaced from your subconscious mind to your conscious mind. Because our subconscious mind is an infinite repository of many, many impressions. And sometimes they just pop up. Just like if you remember yesterday, I gave the example how in the lake, suddenly a bubble pops up. Poof, like that, some of these past pains or pleasures, they pop up. And that impressions create certain inclinations and certain mood distortions, right? All of these happen within our. So we have to overcome that. Until we overcome that, we cannot focus on understanding Krishna properly, right? So that is what is being spoken of by understanding that removing of past sinful reactions, like that. Such a person, when these are removed, then such a person is now prepared to work towards transcendence. And what does seeing Krishna in full mean? Very, very important sutra, text number 30, right? And that is where this particular chapter ends, the last verse. So Krishna talks about some important terminologies. Learning to see Krishna as the Adibhuta, Adi Deva, then Adi Yajna, like that. So these are so learning to see Krishna as Adi Bhuta means the governing principle, the fundamental principle of this material manifestation. Adi Deva means all the different devatas who are involved in the control of this world. And Adi Yajna means the one who is the governing principle of all the sacrifices, right? So literally this whole world is running on the basis of Krishna. Understanding that complete picture is what understanding Krishna in full means. And for that to happen, we have to overcome our past sinful impressions. Then we will not fall prey to this kind of philosophical misunderstandings as polytheism or impersonalism. The Devata Upasana or the Mayavad understanding will be able to overcome. So having mentioned this, of course, this is still, an open-ended ending, because the chapter has not. Suddenly, Krishna spoke about these three terms, Adibhuta, Adideva, Adi Yajna. We don't know what those terms are. So Arjuna in the next chapter is going to pick up these terms. Hey, Krishna, hold on. You use some terms, interesting terms here. What do you mean by all of this, right? And we'll see in the next session, we'll see Arjuna is going to ask some very interesting technical questions. And very, very powerful chapter, the next one. It's going to change our whole perspective of this reality. If you remember in one of my previous sessions I spoke, I'm going to talk about this multidimensional nature of this reality. That is going to be the theme of our next chapter. And most importantly, what should be our consciousness? Prabhupada talks about, Krishna also talks about Prayana Kale Chamam Te Vidur Yukta Chitasa. Prayana Kala means your consciousness at the time of death, right? The end journey. Prayana means journey. At that end journey, what should be your consciousness? So all those themes Krishna is going to take up in the next chapter, like that. So very quickly, let me summarize what we discussed today. So we began this chapter, Jnana Vijnana Yoga, right? Where we said this is the yoga of knowledge and realized knowledge. And the word Jnana, we said, it is not the Sankhya Jnana, but this is Bhagavad Aishwarya Jnana, knowledge about Lord's potencies. And by developing this knowledge, we can develop a very close personal connection. It is that vision to see the Lord in everything, right? I like to call this chapter as a telescope chapter. Telescope means something is very, very far, it brings you near. Likewise, it may seem like Krishna is so far away, but if you understand this chapter and even the subsequent chapters, you will see actually Krishna is not so far. He is very close to us right here, right? So that how do I do that, right? So that knowledge of Krishna, right, we discussed, it begins with hearing about Krishna, then knowing about Krishna, then finally we have to absorb our consciousness in Krishna. So what does understanding Krishna or the absolute truth means? Understanding three things: matter, spirit, and contour of the both. MSC. Easy way to remember that, right? So if you have to become an MSc in Krishna's signs. Then you will understand Krishna as the absolute truth. So matter, we saw the 8 categories. Spirit means the jiva who's trying to dominate over these material elements and try to enjoy them. And Krishna as the controller of both. And we saw in that section that how the conception of God and the conception of absolute truth are not one and the same. God typically means just the creator, maintainer, destroyer, origin, dissolution, and maintenance, right? So we are not talking about just that. Beyond that, it includes matter and spirit, the entire macrocosm put together. That is what is absolute truth, and that is a Krishna we are trying to understand, right? But in this, and Krishna gives some examples also, how whether you are an Ashtanga yogi, whether you are an ascetic, whether you are a karma yogi, all that you are dealing with actually are with Krishna's energies. In a sense, nothing is independent of Krishna, even though Krishna is independent of everything else, right? So if indeed one may say, if Krishna is everywhere, then why am I not able to see Krishna? Because my vision is right now covered by the 3 modes of material nature, right? And how do I overcome those 3 modes? By surrendering to Krishna. But not everyone surrenders. There are 4 categories of people who don't surrender: Muda, Naradhama, Maya, Pitagyana, and Asurim Bhavamashita. And there are 4 categories of people who do surrender. Who are they? Artho, Arthasi, Jigyasu, and Jnani. But among those who surrender, the first 3 have some kind of a limited motivation. But here the motivation is of conviction. The Jnani is convinced. And we spoke about the special, how Krishna glorifies such a Jnani like that. But in this journey of surrendering to Krishna, through philosophical intellectual absorption, there is a challenge. In fact, there are 2 challenges. The first, both are philosophical misunderstanding. The first philosophical misunderstanding is anything greater than me is God. So all the devatas are also God. So that kind of a polytheistic understanding is one misunderstanding. Second misunderstanding is the impersonal understanding. Oh, God is so great, he cannot have a form. So Krishna calls them as less intelligent and no intelligent or foolish, respectively. So the solution to overcome this kind of philosophical challenges is you have to understand Krishna in full. And this is where I'm emphasizing that this jnana we spoke about is not like the ordinary academic knowledge. Academic knowledge you can understand through intelligence. But this special knowledge about Krishna, to understand that, not just intelligence, but you need to purify your existence. And that purification of existence happens when we deal with our past impressions, the past sinful impressions. And when you do that, then you will see, oh, Krishna, you are that active principle in this creation. You are the Adibhuta. Oh, Krishna, actually, it is your potencies which are empowering the Devatas. You are the Adideva. Oh, Krishna, all the sacrifices that people are doing, ultimately, you are the benefactor. You are the one who is a Yajna Purusha. So one understands that. So that is the perfection of this understanding and seeing. Then we'll see Krishna completely in full, right? And with this, we'll end today's discussion. So let us now open the forum for any questions or comments that you may have. Slightly technical chapter, right? I hope you are able to connect. So we already have a couple of hands raised. So Vanishriji, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, my pranams to you.
Hare Krishna.
First of all, before even I ask you the question, please accept my apologies if it sounds weird.
Okay.
I'm just a neophyte and new into the KC platform. Okay. So hence my question might be really weird. Please excuse me.
Sure.
Thank you so much for the beautiful explanation and insight you provide chapter wise.
Mm-hmm.
While I've heard Bhagavad Gita from so many people, I mean ISKCON devotees as well, I've read myself, I never got so much of clarity, so much of insights the way you have explained. I'm really grateful to you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Now my question to you, Prabhu, you spoke about the samskaras or the impressions,
mm-hmm.
past impressions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose this is something what we refer to as anartha nivrittis. Is that right, or is it different, Prabhu?
So these samskaras are what that create. Now samskaras can be both any impression. It has both positive side and negative side.
Understand.
When some of these samskaras create those lower cravings within us, we end up overvaluing things which have no value. Artha means value, anartha means something that has no value. So when you overvalue things which are not useful for us, that is called as anartha. Right?
Can you just correlate with an example, Prabhu, when you said anartha?
Okay. Like for example, let's take the anartha of greed. So we understand from the previous section, like for example, in chapter number 5, we discussed how ultimately Krishna is the master, he's a controller, he's a real enjoyer. That is the right philosophical understanding. But our past samskara of trying to enjoy this world will make us wanting to crave, wanting to develop that greed in this world while dealing with the worldly things. But that greed is not going to take us anywhere. It is only going to entangle us more and more. So that way, your tendency, that emotion of wanting to overvalue greed is a disturbance for you. Therefore, it is an anartha.
Excellent. So there could be also some past impressions that could be leading to some good feel also, right? Good experiences also.
Yes.
Will a sadhaka need to kind of overcome those positive expressions also, or only the not so good expressions?
Okay. Do you want me to scare you?
I would want to hear the truth, Prabhu, because this is where we understand where we are and how do we need to progress further, right?
From sometimes there can be some positive impressions also. When I use the word positive, I'm talking in terms of worldly papa and punya, or sin and piety. Sometimes some pious impressions can also be an hurdle in one's connection to spirituality.
Can you again correlate an example when you said pious?
Yeah. Okay, that's what I'll give you an example. So, for example, some people may have a very, very sattvic inclination.
Okay.
And because that sattva guna, for example, they may want to go for a jog every day in the morning, which is very good, going for exercise or going to outdoor activities early in the morning, But then early in the morning is also the time when there are prayers offered to the Lord. This Mangalarti is happening. There's a time for meditation where you're meditating on the Lord. So one may have a strong inclination of wanting to go in the presence of nature and not engage in something. Now, again, I'm not undermining connection to nature. Nature also one can learn to see Krishna, but that is an indirect way of connecting to Krishna. But when one overcomes or one supersedes a direct process or an indirect process, then even such sattvic impression can also sometimes become a hurdle. But I can assure you, 99.9% of the world is suffering from the other kind of impressions, the non-sattvic impressions. But yes, there will be few people for whom the sattvic impressions can also be, a detrimental factor.
Okay. Now coming to the way we would overcome or kind of, nullify or purify. I don't know if I'm using the right word, nullify. So that is what we do by way of our sadhana practices, chanting, reading, deity worship, right? Listening, hearing, kirtanam, blah blah, right? So what happens is that I'm a neophyte. I'm referring only to my case, Prabhu. So in the course of our discharging our day-to-day devotional activities, you're really occurring few more, right? You're creating some more impressions. Am I speaking properly?
Right.
So this kind of thing goes on till the time you reach that stage of whatever you call it, nishta, ruchi, or asakti, bhava, prema. I mean, it's a long way to go. I've just kind of memorized these steps. So can you please help me understand how do we understand this, that I would have kind of, reached, or I will reach a stage of completely zeroing down these anarthas or even the good positive impressions, so that I'm at that right platform, right? So how do I understand? Is it something obviously it is achievable because we have seen the Acharya's cases, but for people in this current situations and where I don't have the gyan or the knowledge, please throw some light in terms of practical aspects.
Yeah. So see, basically now we are dealing with three kinds of impressions here. First, are the non-sattvic impressions. Second are the sattvic impressions. And the third are the spiritual impressions. Sometimes the sattvic and spiritual may look similar, but they vary in terms of the intention and the purpose. Like, for example, somebody may be having that natural inclination to do fasting, do the tapasya of fasting. But fasting, when in a spiritual understanding, is upavasa. I'm trying to go close to the Lord. So that day I fast, not for the sake of fasting as a tapasya, but I'm trying to keep myself free or get little extra time, which I will save by not eating. I will get that extra time in engaging more in spiritual activities, right? So the same fasting can also have a sattvic impression, or it can also create a spiritual impression. So the idea is, when you enhance your consciousness with more and more of the spiritual impressions, gradually you are watering down those other kinds of impressions.
What do you mean watering down? Is it getting nullified, or is it zeroing down by itself because you're increasing your spiritual impressions? Is that what you meant?
Okay, I'll give you a very, very simple example. How does memory work? Memory works through repetition, right?
Yes.
So if I give you a shloka, every day you recite that shloka, as you keep repeating, then you memorize that. But if you don't practice that shloka, if that repetition of pattern is not happening, or for example, if you end up memorizing something else over a period of time, you will slowly forget that shloka. So that is how even the impressions work, right? Because the chitta, right now we are all still operating the level of the mind. At the level of the mind is a very impressionable thing. It's like clay. So repeatedly, if you keep hitting that clay in a particular pattern, that pattern becomes an impression on it.
So now, that means the past impressions fade away gradually. When
they just wane away. Exactly. That would be the best word. They gradually wane away, right? And you're creating those spiritual impressions, right? And now we are going even at a very, very deeper level of our subconscious space, right? And that is why it is very important that as practicing devotees, especially in the bhakti tradition, it is very important that when we are engaging in these bhakti practices, we learn to relish those practices, not do them for the sake of doing. Like, it's not that you are going to Mangalarti, okay, I have to go to Mangalarti, but rather be excited to look at the Lord, be excited to sing and dance, be excited to chant the holy name. That enthusiasm, when we demonstrate, so activity coupled with enthusiasm creates the spiritual impression, and slowly we get over all our other kinds of impressions that we have accumulated over the past, like that.
Excellent. But you know something, Prabhu, I know myself where I stand now, because I don't have that enthusiasm or that excitement when I'm doing these practices. I'm being very straight. So that means I'm like a lot of anarthas accumulated. Or is it that I don't have that attraction for Krishna, though I understand the basic philosophy of Krishna consciousness. I'm not able to get or enjoy or experience that enthusiasm while I'm practicing these sadhanas, right?
Right.
I'm lacking somewhere.
So don't worry about that.
No. But I'm just making it very clear. So from here is what I need to go to the next step.
Right.
How do I develop that?
Exactly.
Different.
Understand that. Understand that this enthusiasm is something that you cannot fake it. It is not something that you can get on your own, but it comes by Mahat Kripa, which means when you associate with some advanced Vaishnavas. This is the response I gave in yesterday's question as well. Bhakti comes from bhakti. So which means that when you associate with other like-minded enthusiastic devotees, their enthusiasm gets induced into your heart, right? And along with that, what does it mean to associate with devotees? I mean, this is a concept we'll elaborate more in the 9th chapter again. But basically, when you are hearing and chanting in that kind of association, especially hearing from advanced souls, like hear Srila Prabhupada's lectures regularly. If you just by hearing that, what is happening is the conviction that Srila Prabhupada has or great acharyas have in their heart, that gets transferred into your heart, and that is the seed for your enthusiasm. So you cannot just like that say, you cannot fake that enthusiasm, but rather it comes from Mahat Kripa. Bhakti itself comes from that Mahat Kripa. Prabhupada also in that Etam Shvantagatam Papam verse, specifically the theme that triggered your question, I will encourage you to read that particular purport, which I'm referring to text number 28. So Prabhupada there, he talks about, it's not just about overcoming your past sins, but finally through that association of devotees, this spiritual journey, or especially the devotional journey, it begins. So that is the, the important take home message for all of us. Like that. Okay. So I will transfer the question, Vanishji, to, I think there are two more hands raised.
Sure,
and
sure. Sorry, Prabhu, I took longer time. I'm
Yeah.
really sorry. Excuse me. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hare Krishna. So let's, Sureshji, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hari Bol, Prabhu. Yeah.
Hari Bol. Prabhuji, thank you very much for a wonderful session. I just had a small question. Gave a really a wonderful and a very powerful statement that, we are always interacting with, but we are not able to experience that.
Right.
And that is because of the three modes of nature. And Krishna says that this three modes of material nature is only my energy, and it's very difficult to overcome it. And then you said it, there are four people who don't surrender, and there are four types of people who surrender. Is, Prabhuji, that this four types of people who surrender, like Su and the Jnani and all. So just by being in that category, a person will surrender, or is he that he has to do surrender to Lord?
Okay.
So that is my question, Prabhuji.
So specifically regarding the Bhakti tradition understanding, Sri Rupa Goswami gives his explanation that all these four, Artho, Arthati, Jigyasu, Jnani, when they go to that state of whatever, distress or desire for profit, or that inquisitiveness, or even that knowledge, in that state, when they come in contact with a devotee, their Shraddha or their spiritual conviction begins. And from that spiritual, from the beginning, from the little sowing of the seed of that spiritual conviction, as it starts to grow, they associate more with like-minded devotees, and gradually that culminates into Shraddha, all the stages that, even in the previous, student was also asking about these different stages of Nishtha, Ruchi, you heard those terms. So that whole progression from Ado Shraddha, Tata Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti, Nishtha, Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, Prema, and that surrender comes by going through this progression, right? So it is important that, and there are examples also given. Rupa Goswami gives examples at how, Artho, when somebody is in a distress, like Gajendra was in a distressed state, but he used that distress as an opportunity to connect to Krishna. Arthati, Dhruva Maharaj, he went through that, it was also kind of a distress, but because he wanted wealth greater than his own ancestors. So because he went with a desire for wealth, but he got connected. His guru, Gajendra's guru, directly was the Chaitya Guru, Paramatma himself. But for Dhruva Maharaj, he met Narad Muni along the way, and Narad Muni gave him the devotional connection, and he finally went through his whole progression of surrender, perfection of surrender. Artha Jigyasu. So the sages of Naimisharanya, it is described, they were all Jigyasu people. And when they came in contact with a pure devotee like Suta Goswami, from those who had karma nishta, who had conviction in all these Vedic rituals, from there, their nishta transformed to bhakti nishta, means they wanted to hear Krishna Katha more and more. In fact, if you read that first canto, they say, we came here wanting to do all these yagyas, but our face has become black. That's the only benefit we got. But now listening to little Harikatha, Krishna Katha from you, our hearts have become so enlivened, and we are convinced that this is the right thing to do. So they also, by connection with the devotee, they got that deeper understanding, right? And finally, Jigyasu and Jnanis, like the Kumaras, they are already so advanced. But when they smelled the tulsi from the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, Tulsi Devi induced that bhakti in their heart. So the important thing again, similar to the previous, that the devotional connection or a devotee connection, when it comes, one's journey of surrender begins, right? So even the intent to wholeheartedly surrender is also a level in surrender. So do not think surrender is just that perfect stage at, oh, Krishna, I'm yours. That is a very advanced stage. But even a sincere, earnest expression of intent to surrender is also surrender. And then we go through that whole progression that I spoke about. Does it make sense?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for wonderful clarity in my mind. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Gail, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
Yes,
Krishna.
a couple things. One is it correct or incorrect to equate the three modes with Krishna's illusory potency, or is illusion something that the three modes does? It's like a technical distinction. I don't know if there is a distinction, but
right. Okay. Yes. At one level, it is a right understanding, because ultimately it is that three modes. Now, again, before that, I would like to define what the illusion is. The illusion is not seeing something's connection to Krishna, not seeing the world as connected to Krishna or something that belongs to Krishna and that it has to be utilized in service of Krishna. Not seeing that is an illusion. And that is what the three gunas do to us. Tamoguna makes us completely inert to any kind of relationship. Rajoguna wants us to be the object of relationship. I want to enjoy. And Sattva-guna can sometimes make you little indifferent to that relationship. That is how we are not, that is an illusion that these gunas put us into. Right?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, thank you. Another point is when it comes to the distinction between absolute truth and God. So, I don't know, maybe this answer involves beta, I don't know, but I'm just wondering if when we say God, that refers to Vishnu, that feature of God when he is dealing only with this material world.
Right.
And the absolute truth is when it includes the God aspect, but also his spiritual Lilas also.
Right.
Is that correct conception?
So I'm looking for a sentence. Actually, Prabhupada himself answers your question in the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita. So let me actually see if I can find that specific sentence. So basically, Prabhupada in the introduction, he writes that there are 5 main subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, right? Or God in our understanding, one who's doing the creation, maintenance, and destruction. Jivas, the living entities. Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, material energy. Kala, time. And Karma, that which is basically binding us to this world. All of these 5 put together is what is called as the absolute truth. And that absolute truth is Krishna. And that is how we are trying to understand Krishna. He is that summum bonum. He is that macrocosm, that grand integration of all this. So literally, when we said Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Vasudeva is everything or Krishna is everything, it is that understanding of the absolute truth here means that it includes everything about. So there is nothing that is disconnected from Krishna. Now, this is not like the Mayavadi understanding that everything is Krishna, right? But rather, there is this simultaneous, like, the Beda Abeda. So to give you a very interesting example, this is a concept that we'll elaborate a little more in the 13th chapter also, like about the nature of Jiva, right? Is Jiva the same as Ishvara? Because if ultimately Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma, if everything is absolute truth, then Jiva also, is it same as Krishna? So this oneness and difference can be understood beautifully. The Upanishads give a beautiful metaphor. of sunlight and sun's light. Sunlight and sun apostrophe S light. Now, what do you mean by sun's light? Right? We know what is sun's light. We call it as moonlight. Because moon in itself does not have light of its own. It is merely reflecting the light of the sun and giving it to us at the night time. So literally even night time, you are interacting only with the sun. But it would be foolish to say moonlight and sunlight are the same because they are so different. Because moonlight is cold and cooling and sunlight is hot, warming. Moonlight is white, the sunlight is yellow. So there are a lot of differences between moonlight and sunlight. But yet, if you say they are only different, that is also foolishness because moonlight is coming from sunlight. So that way, this is a good example of oneness and difference. This example is quoted in the context of explaining the nature of Jiva. Jiva's consciousness is not independent of Krishna. Jiva, like the moon, is indirectly reflecting the sun, Krishna's consciousness. But once it bounces off the Jiva, I'm using this to, don't take it literally, but from our sun and moon example, once this Krishna's consciousness, it bounces off the Jiva, it becomes Jivas. In that way, there is the difference and the oneness aspect. So that way,
you repeat that last line? I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last line?
So last line I said that just like how the sun's light, once it bounces off the moon, it becomes moonlight. Likewise, when Krishna's consciousness, once it bounces off the Jiva, because Krishna is empowering the Jiva through consciousness also. Even that is Krishna's only. So then it no more is called, you cannot say Jiva and Krishna are the same, but it becomes Jiva's consciousness. That way it is the difference aspect that is coming. So this is the understanding. You have to acknowledge that there is a oneness of everything that we see in this creation with Krishna, and yet there is a distinctness. So when this is the complete understanding of the absolute truth, the moment you disconnect this world from God, you are making the world as independent of God. And that is again a philosophical misunderstanding, right? So this absolute truth understanding is something so deep. When you put everything that you see in this creation, all these 5 elements, Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma, and put them all together, that summum, that composite macrocosmic understanding is the absolute truth, and that absolute truth is Krishna. That is the depth of understanding. So we are not trying to understand Krishna as God in Bhagavad Gita. We are going even many notches higher. We are trying to understand Krishna as that absolute truth, as that summum bonum, as that macrocosm.
But in that macrocosm, right? Of those 5 subject matters of the Gita, what part of that macrocosm would be excluded from the God concept?
Excluded from, not from the absolute, excluded from the God concept? Yeah.
Yes, because the whole 5 together are the absolute truth. So what part of that is only God concept?
So when you are talking about, let's go back to the definition of God there. God is somebody who's creating, maintaining, and destroying, right? Which means that the very definition of God is in relationship to the creation.
Yes.
Right? Then what is God doing when there is no creation? Does he vanish? You see? So that definition, So, or to give a more relatable example, a teacher is a teacher only in front of students, but once the Zoom session is over, do I just vanish into thin air and again come back every day in the tomorrow again at the right time? No, I also have an existence independent of being a creator or a teacher in this case, right?
Yeah, that's why I said that maybe absolute truth means the God aspect, but also Krishna's life in the spiritual world aspect.
Yes. So those 3 levels, we'll talk about that in the next chapter, also in the subsequent chapters. Beyond that Ishvara or the God understanding comes the understanding of Brahman. Beyond that comes the understanding of Paramatma, and then beyond that is Bhagavan. right? And within that understanding of Bhagavan, as Prabhupada highlights, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, or the understanding of Krishna as Bhagavan, as a supreme personality of Godhead, that includes the understanding of absolute truth. All of that are connected to Krishna, right? And that is the king of knowledge, which we are going to discuss in the 9th chapter, just little ahead, 2 more chapters. All right.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you all so much. And I think we are way past our time. So I'll end today's session here. So thank you all so much for your wonderful participation. So tomorrow again, we'll continue with chapter number 8, another very, very interesting chapter. So let's now conclude with our closing prayers. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you all very much. So see you in tomorrow's session. Hare Krishna.